Well, hey everyone, how's it going? This is Nate Weston with the Beaver Watershed Alliance. This is our Alliance High Tunnels for Native Plants. We are talking on the high tunnel systems operations in this one. This is the fourth training in our four-part series. Here we are going to be having a poll at the bottom of the screen that should be live now. I believe my co-host Carrie has activated that. If you would. There we go. All right, so the poll is live. Please feel free to fill that out. Also, on the right side of your window or screen, you should see a chat box. Please go ahead and feel free to set that to all panelists and guests and participants. That way we can all see it. Feel free to let us know where you are attending from. We'd love to hear that. I just have a quick presentation I'm going to run through. It's going to be a little bit different than the ones you might have seen if you've attended some of the previous ones. I work for the Beaver Watershed Alliance. We're a 501c3 nonprofit organization located in Springdale, Arkansas. We are a water quality organization, and our mission is the proactive protection, enhancement, and sustainment of Beaver Lake and its water quality and that of its tributaries. We primarily do that through education, outreach, technical assistance, BMPs, scientific monitoring, and research. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Beaver Lake watershed, the Beaver Lake Reservoir extends up into Missouri, but the Beaver Watershed Alliance's program area is this watershed here you can see on the left. On the northern end is the lakeside area, and this is the drinking water source for 1 in 6, or roughly 500,000 Arkansans. Our program area encompasses parts of Benton, Carroll, Madison, Washington, Franklin, and Crawford counties. Beaver Lake was impounded in the 1960s by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for flood control, and later drinking water was added onto that. We're roughly 1,200 square miles, and we are a state priority watershed. And our watershed is roughly 67% forest. And you can see a band of agricultural land in here in the center part, up here in northeastern Washington County and northwestern Madison County. For many of you who aren't familiar with watersheds, this is basically a basin of land which collects rainwater and concentrates it into rivers, eventually flowing into from streams into rivers and eventually until it reaches the ocean. Watersheds are delineated into arbitrary management areas called hydrologic units. Here we can kind of see some hydrologic units up around the War Eagle. And these get progressively smaller and smaller and smaller, so we can focus on smaller scales of land. And again, we're primarily a drinking water organization as our mission statement, so we focus heavily on source water protection. This is the raw water sources that are pulled out of Beaver Lake, represented by those blue triangles. Raw water is pulled out of Beaver Lake and is distributed all throughout northwest Arkansas, going all the way down into the urban areas of Bentonville, Rogers, Springdale, Fayetteville, Lowell, and all those municipalities on the left or west, and all the way towards Harrison to the east. And again, that's roughly half a million people. We do a lot through education and outreach, through workshops such as this and farm field days. Fun fact, this workshop was supposed to be an in-person field day with our participants and volunteers visiting high tunnels. But due to the pandemic, we decided to switch this to a virtual format. And Mark Cain, who is with us today, is our co-panelist and was gracious enough to host us and to provide his extensive knowledge on high tunnels and high tunnel operation and maintenance and management. We do several things related to plants, and not only plants. We have planted trees with volunteers. We've distributed thousands of trees throughout our watershed. We instruct at science fairs and various functions on the role of native plants in stream management, stream vitality, and stream restorations, as well as talk to local farmers and private landowners on managing their forests, pasture lands, prairies, pastures, and things like that. We work with private landowners a lot. We go out with them and do technical assistance through site assessment planning. That can be anything from invasive plant management, pasture management, or encouraging voluntary forest management practices. Everything we do is the voluntary implementation of best management practices focused towards source water protection. We work with several partners. This is Rock Creek, which is a tributary to the West Fork of the White River, which is a primary drinking water source for Beaver Lake. This is a listed stream with the Environmental Protection Agency due to silt, and so it gets a lot of attention for best management practices. One of the things we're seeing here is where a partner of ours, the Watershed Conservation Resource Center, took funding from the EPA and did a stream bank restoration on this part of the West Fork. Programs like this are very valuable. This uses a lot of native plants, requires a lot of native plants, and this was funded through the Natural Resources Conservation Services Regional Conservation Partnership Program. It's a mouthful, and I always trip it up. We do erosion monitoring as part of our scientific monitoring practices. Basically, whenever we are intending or whenever we are working with partners to implement a stream bank restoration, it goes through a monitoring process where we and our partners monitor how much erosion is coming off of that stream bank. That's very important because it gives us an idea of how much sediment and siltation is going into that stream. A lot of people ask, who cares? It's just erosion, it's mud, it's natural. It's a natural process. Why should I care? Why does it matter? And this is very important because it heavily affects drinking water. Sediment is the #1 pollutant in streams because it chokes out wildlife. It's very costly to treat, and it has a wide range of negative consequences. This is fall, and a lot of time, and I'm always getting complaints. Why is the drinking water smell and taste weird? And that is a direct result of sediment and siltation and the presence of mineral phosphorus occurring in water as a direct result of the erosion you see in these images. Mineral phosphorus is a controlling factor for algae growth. And when algae dies, it produces an organic compound that humans can taste and smell at an insanely low concentration. I believe it's 1 part per trillion or something like that, and that's what you're smelling. It's basically the resources given off by that decaying algae. Phosphorus is natural. It's sourced from the weathering of rock as it goes into the ground. It's a whole process called the phosphorus cycle. And basically it's in soil, in minerals, and it eventually comes up and plants absorb it. They need very little of it, but it's also much harder to get than calcium and nitrogen. As a matter of fact, you see it as this middle number here on a bag of fertilizer. And as you can see, it's always in a much lower concentration than the other two, than both nitrogen and calcium. Basically, the erosion, the impacts it has is lost land. It's also hazardous. People can fall in, get injured. It releases nutrients, primarily in the form of the phosphorus, and it releases particulates into the soil, and that's that phosphorus. And it could be anything that's washing off the shoreline or the stream side that's in the ground. It could be bacteria, it could be E. coli, things like that. Those minerals also again lead to algal blooms, which depletes the oxygen in the water column. They can be potentially toxic, which we've seen on rare occasions, unfortunately, and it leads to those disgusting and foul-tasting byproducts. I'm going to skip through this because, we'll just go through it briefly. So many of y'all are from the Ozarks, not all of you. Historically, the Ozarks are a fire-adapted landscape, and a lot of people may wonder what that means. These are just some quotes. We can look through those later, but basically, the Ozarks used to look like this. They were a really wide, open range of primarily oak and hickory dominated, what we call woodlands or oak savannas. And they were called barrens, and I say that in quotation marks because many of these lands were surveyed by timber company employees, and they came out and called these barrens because they saw the timber and it didn't look like it was commercially viable and not very valuable in terms of timber. We got to this point. The succession of our land is we'll actually just skip through this. This is so I'm just going to go through this. Sorry, I included a lot of this information because we weren't expecting Mark to be joining us today. Mark was, I believe, he was having eye surgery, and we were unexpectedly blessed with his presence today. Again, native plants are very valuable. They improve landscape diversity, and as we've seen over time with homogenation of landscapes due to urbanization and mass agriculture, it's led to a loss of diversity and a loss of plant diversity as well as wildlife diversity. This is a picture of a historic oak savanna, as we talked about earlier, from 1937, showing the scattered trees. And over time, this is from 1990, we see succession, which is basically the growth of trees, filling in those open spaces between, and doing what we call occluding the canopy or crowding each other out, and this leads to a loss of diversity. A lot of this is from a forest management workshop that I also present. Basically, this is all in the vein of diversity, and plant diversity is key. This is one of the big drivers of this program that we're talking about, the Alliance High Tones for Native Plants, and it may seem a little bit esoteric and a little bit unrelated, but in the grand scheme of things, it is quite related. Here we see what we call a heavily occluded canopy of trees. You notice there's a lot of vines, twisted stems, fairly small timber, and this is not very good. It has a low diversity of plants, and this is kind of what we want to see. We want to see an open canopy or a diversity of plants. We have good grasses, good wildflowers, and programs like the High Tunnels for Native Plants would encourage planting and propagation of plants such as these wildflowers, following forest management practices like a prescribed fire or an invasive plant removal. The Beaver Watershed Alliance also does some scientific monitoring or some scientific evaluation. Here we see a pond optimization project, and this is basically on a watershed level, taking ponds and placing them in hypothetical locations to reduce the peak storm flow. So when it rains, all the water flows out of those watersheds and out of those hydrologic units, collects in the streams and then in rivers, and there's a flashiness to that. This program would try to redistribute some of that water and decentralize it, so you have less concentration of that storm water hitting those streams and hitting those rivers at any given time, causing less erosion. The Beaver Watershed Alliance also, as part of the forest best management practices we do, is native vegetation. Here we had some volunteers with the Watershed Conservation Resource Center collecting native rye in this oak savanna that we see along the White River. Invasive plant removals like this kudzu removal we saw is a before and after pic down around Winslow, where it's been a challenge for several years. Bush honeysuckle removal on Mount Sequoia Woods. And this was along a stream, and as you can see, the canopy was heavily choked with bush honeysuckle, and we opened it up and you can see the stream. We also implement stormwater BMPs like these rock check dams, water bars along roads, which is this log situated in the road at an angle, invasive plant removal of bush honeysuckle, And here this person is doing what we call hack and squirt. And so a lot of people are probably wondering, like, where do plants fit into all this? You're talking a lot about invasive plant removals and best management practices and all that. And native plants are very critical because they're foundational to the ecological health and the forestry health. Native plants filter stormwater, rainwater. They maintain the soil quality, and they actually improve and encourage the soil quality as they grow and die and reproduce. Whenever there's an invasive plant removal, the best management practice is to come along and introduce or repopulate a native plant species which occupies the same ecological niche as the one you just removed. So if you remove an invasive understory shrub with berries or fruits on it, it's recommended to replace it with something that's similar to that. Otherwise, you run into a problem of, you open up an ecological niche, and a similar species is going to move in and become a new challenge and a new problem. Whenever a stream bank restoration is done, native trees and shrubs are used to reinforce those stream banks. Low impact developments, native plant materials are used for bioremediation, for wetland habitat restoration, wildlife habitat improvement. Native plants are needed in each and every one of these levels at some point. You can say they're foundational. Yeah, this is one of our volunteers removing bush honeysuckle, and as soon as he does this, he's going to leave an open patch in these woodlands, and if something isn't replaced there, or if something's not available, then more bush honeysuckle is going to move in, or a different invasive is going to move in, Chinese privet, or some of the others that might exist in that area. We can't do this work alone. We have a ton of valuable partners, and who all contribute a significant amount of effort. And if you have any questions about this, I'd be happy to talk about it in detail. I skipped over a few things because y'all don't want to hear me talk about forest management all day. That's a separate talk, and I wasn't sure if we'd need that time to fill this. Primary reason we came here today is Mark Cain is with us. He's with Dripping Springs Garden out near Huntsville, Arkansas, and he's an expert in the Natural Resources Conservation Services High Tunnel program. And that is a little bit separate to this program, but it is complementary to this program. And I will need Carrie to make me host so I can share this screen. So, Mark. Mark, are you there with us?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Mark, how long have you been operating your high tunnels?
I am here.
Okay.
Oh, I think we probably have been doing high tunnels for somewhere between 15 and 20 years.
Okay. And you applied with the NRCS high tunnel program?
Yeah, the NRCS high tunnel program came into existence around 2008, late 2008, and I believe we built one in 2009. Actually, excuse me, I think the first one went up in 2009, and the program wasn't quite happening at that point. The next one we put up was in 2011, and that was NRCS cost share. And then the next one was 2017, that was also NRCS cost share.
Okay. Well, Mark, I'm going to go ahead and share this video here.
An experienced organic farmer shares his successes and challenges with Caterpillar and hoop-style greenhouses in Northwest Arkansas.
So if I were a small grower and I were going to build a 20 by 40 foot hoop house in order to grow native plants, containerized native plants to resell to either landscapers or to a wholesale nursery, some of the considerations I would have would be finding an appropriate hoop house kit that matches the dimensions that I want, the 20 by 40. Now these houses that are behind me were from Stuppies. They're called Stuppies Polar greenhouses. They actually sell them to be used for 20 by 100 foot houses, but you can buy as many of the bows as you want. So if you figure out how many bows you need in order to cover your 40 feet of linear space, you can just order that many bows and they'll supply you with the information and the materials for your end walls. Now on these houses behind me, the end walls are simply constructed out of 4 by 4 cedar posts, the verticals, and then we framed in treated 2 by 4 doors. I would not suggest using doors like we have on these hoop houses, which are just cheap storm doors. They tend to, the hinges are not strong and they tend to break if you happen to leave the door open. And they get caught in a windstorm, it'll easily break the hinges. So if I were doing it again, I think I would probably frame the doors in to accommodate one of the metal greenhouse doors that we have on some of our larger houses that are actually 4 feet wide. That makes it more accessible for a walk behind tiller in case you do need to go in and till. For people who are doing containerized plants, you have a couple of choices. The easiest choice is putting them on the ground on top of landscape fabric. You don't necessarily need gravel unless you have a situation where you have a poorly drained area that's going to be wet all the time, in which case you might want to put a couple inches of pea gravel or something like that as fill, and then put landscape fabric over it in order to keep your weeds down. Because what will happen over time is that soil will fall into that gravel and it'll start to grow weeds, and then you have a weeding problem. So it's nice to have landscape fabric down the ground, or if you want to have benches to have them at higher off the ground, that's fine. Something to consider are the sidewalls. So there are many greenhouse kits that are Quonset hut styles that are just basically half circles and they don't have a sidewall. So a sidewall refers to a straight edge along the sides of the greenhouse and then the curve starts. So you do have Quonset style that are curved completely around like this, and you have sidewall greenhouses that go up for 3 to 5 to 8 feet and then have a curve. I prefer the ones with sidewalls, and the reason is because if you have a straight curve Quonset hut, then when you have your plastic rolled up on your roll-up sides, rain can penetrate those edges of the beds. When it's raining hard, your beds on the outer edges or your plants are going to get super wet because they don't have any protection. When you have sidewalls, the rain falls off and it avoids coming in the sides of the greenhouse. So I would suggest 3 to 4 foot wide sidewalls, if even 5 foot if you can find them. I believe Morgan County also sells a 20-foot wide house that you can probably specify if you want it 40 feet long. I'm sure that's fine. Generally these type of houses only have a single purlin down the center. That's that one long pipe that runs down the middle. And then you're going to have these unless you have a winch down system, which you probably can get on those houses from Morgan County, you're going to have a roll-up system in which the plastic is attached to a pipe at the ground, and then the plastic is affixed to the pipe, and then the pipe has an extension on it with a handle, and you just roll it up and it just rolls the plastic up to the hip board where your top plastic is attached. I think anyone that's seriously interested in gardening, especially in our climate, can be interested and enjoy growing out of season or extending the season with hoop houses. You can call them walk-in tunnels or hoop houses, because you can grow things all winter long that you couldn't grow before. In the past, we only ate Chinese cabbage for salad in the wintertime and root crops because that's what we could store from the garden. And now at any time in the winter we can come out, we can pick spinach, chard, kale, arugula, all kinds of things out of our greenhouses. And that really is why the Hoop House initiative at NRCS was started, was to improve local out-of-season food production. These tunnels are the first tunnels that we started with, and we purchased them from Stuppies greenhouses in Kansas City. and they are 20 feet wide and they're about 45 feet long, and they have 3 foot wide roll-up sidewalls. And we started with these probably in the maybe in the early 2000s. I can't remember exactly how long ago. And they were adequate for what we were doing at the time, but they were not great for things like tomatoes or anything tall because of the 3-foot sidewalls. So actually in the summertime, we remove the end wall, the far end wall opposite the door, and we leave that off all summer. And they're great for smaller farms that just need a little bit of protected space. They're definitely a great backyard garden size for people who want to provide all their salad greens all winter. Grow a tremendous amount for your family and 4 or 5 other ones in a tunnel that size. They have 4 beds that are 4 feet wide inside, with foot wide paths. And so let's go down and take a look at them. This is a smattering of a bunch of different things that are useful for us. We have some overwintering leeks in the side that are basically for home consumption that armadillo got into and tore up a little bit, but still probably okay. And we have these are ornamental cabbages that have been dusted with dipel to discourage the striped worms that are on them, the imported European cabbage worm. But they'll be okay. There's going to be a while, but they make little tiny colored cabbages at the tops, and we put them in flower arrangements in the wintertime. They're a cold season flower for our bouquet work. This is an ornamental amaranth called Hot Biscuits, and it produces a flower stem. They're getting too tall. That's part of what's one of the effects of growing in a hoop house is everything's taller than normal. But we'll be harvesting these for flowers, and then we have another ornamental crop on the other side that looks like armadillos have gotten in over here too. So armadillos are something to be aware of. We do have chicken wire along the sides of these houses, and we keep the doors closed at night. That's one way to try to deal with them. We may have left the door open. A thing about the construction on these houses, 20 feet wide, 45 feet long. The end wall construction is a simple cedar 4x4. There are 4 of them, and they have been notched where the bow hits the 4x4, and then there's a bolt through the 4x4 into the bow, and these are in concrete. These 4x4s are in concrete. Even cedar in the ground will not last more than about 20 years, so you need to think about putting all of your in-wall verticals in concrete. This has a fairly thin hip board that the plastic is attached to, and then it has roll-up sides. This roll-up sides needs some adjustment, but I can show you one of the other ones outside. There's a handle outside that you just crank up and down, and since it's only 3 feet wide, it's not a lot of cranking. It depends on what fits into your marketing scheme.
And what you can
Are you already at a farmer's market? Are you selling to nurseries? Are you, what do you have a market for? People are always looking for this magic crop to make a lot of money out of their hoop house, and they may not have any marketing channels. They may not have any connections for their marketing. So that's like super important. For us, it was pretty easy. We already had been at market for a long time, and it was easy. It was just like falling off a log to have product that was ready to harvest at the beginning of April when the farmers market opened for all of our customers that already existed, right? Instead of waiting until May to have lettuces outside, we had lettuces in early April that were ready. We already had chard, we already had kale, we already had, all these cold season crops, arugula and stuff ready to sell to the public that's coming out en masse in early spring to the farmers market. But if you don't have any of those connections to sell varied product at something like a farmer's market, let's say you're just trying to pinpoint a single crop, you need to go talk to who your potential buyers are going to be, whether it's going to be the nursery that's going to buy native plants, or maybe it's going to be a grocery store that would really like to buy some bagged salad mix, and you're going to specialize in that. I mean, that's like a super difficult question to answer about what am I going to grow to make money in my hoop house, because
yeah, you got to have your market figured out before you plant anything.
And if somebody, let's say if somebody's moving into the area and they don't know the markets and they want to get into growing, the best thing to do is to go visit the types of markets that they feel like they want to sell at and start taking notes. Start taking notes. What's being sold right now, and you see lines of people lining. But just because something sells doesn't mean you can make money at it. You can sell a truckload of sweet corn, but you may not be able to make any money at it. You could probably sell all the broccoli you can possibly grow off of all this acreage and probably not make any money at it. Have it be a net loss for labor.
Because of your competition out there?
Because of how low the price is and how much space it takes to grow that crop. That's why a lot of people on our scale are doing niche marketing. I call organic marketing is also niche marketing, because we have something that sets us apart. Morgan and I both sell at Ozark Natural Foods, and they specialize in organic, certified organic or certified naturally grown product. Well, we started at the farmers market. I moved up to this area because of the Fayetteville farmers market. We actually were looking for land somewhere between Fayetteville and Eureka Springs, specifically to go to the Fayetteville farmers market within commuting distance. But we have a CSA too, and CSA is probably something that like a new grower probably would want to avoid until they sort of get their grounding on exactly how the crops react in their climate and things like that, because even though it's really great to get all that money up front in the spring and have them pay you for your future produce deliveries, it puts you totally on the spot about having to come up with all that product. And like for instance, for the last few years, we've had a CSA for the last 13 years, I think.
Wow.
And we started with 30-something families getting $25 boxes a week, and then it gradually grew up to about 55. Well, this year, because of the pandemic, it jumped to 95. So all of a sudden we had twice as many boxes.
Were you able to meet that demand?
Yeah, but it meant shifting some of our product, away from cut flowers, which is another high value product. When we first took out this blueberry field, and all of a sudden the garden was twice as big with annual crops, we were not comfortable putting that land into vegetables for the farmers market because there's so much competition. It was just like, why would we put 2 more acres into vegetables if we don't know if we can sell them? So that's when we started our CSA, because that's a market that's set group of people, and we know who we're growing for. They've made a commitment to buy all summer. Basically what you have to do is plan it out as best as you can and keep the successions coming all the time. You got to keep planting, keep planting, keep planting. It's fine at a farmer's market. You take your arugula crop and then it's done. Oh shoot, I should have planted some more. Oh well, I got to wait 6 weeks. The CSA, you can't do that. You got to have product next week and next week for 23 straight weeks.
Wow.
$25 times 60 and $18 times 35. And it means that the kind of quantities that we plant, it might be fine to plant a 100-foot bed of green beans for the farmer's market and just harvest it all and then you're done and wait a few weeks. On the CSA, if a 100-foot bed doesn't give you 95 portions of beans, then you're in trouble. Does that make sense? It's super cool for marketing because you have all that stuff is sold. From the time you put the seed in, it's just all sold. You don't have to worry about it, but then you got to come up with it. And we have to keep the customers engaged. I put out a newsletter every week. It's got pictures of the farm and what's happening in the field, and basically our thoughts about being in a farm life, because they're very interested in that.
Yeah.
And we don't get to visit with them all the time because they live, and it's too far for them to come back. And some CSAs have people come out and work and volunteer days, and we're just too far.
Yeah.
And so our newsletter is the way we keep engaged with we call them our homies, they've agreed to support us, and so we've agreed to grow for them, and so they're very important. They're high on the list of. I think it's all this stuff about how to construct the houses, how to manage the houses, how to grow the native plants. That is all super important, but it's very logical and doable. The tricky part is, what is the market? What do the plants sell for? What is the commercial standard? when are they, you know, the cultural information is one thing, like when are they planted, what kind of pots are they put in, what kind of prices are they bringing to the producer at the nursery, how do they get to the end user, and where are the places you can avoid the middle people and get straight to the end user to get the highest profit. Because if these people are going to have one hoop house, then they need to get some bang out of it, or they're going to lose interest in those houses will be abandoned. That's happened a lot with the NRCS cost share program on hoop houses. So, you know, it turned out to be either more work, or there wasn't a market, or we didn't know what we were doing, and it's nice to have the greenhouse, but we're tired of it. You know? So those connections between the end user, the middle person, their nursery, and what are the economics of it all, that's what's going to make it work over the long period. You can spend a lot of wheels getting everything else together, and if that part doesn't work, it all falls apart. And the problem is that effort runs smack into the low prices of commercial produce, whether it's organic or conventional. And so the larger group of buyers out there, like the produce distribution companies like Kimball and Thompson, Whole Foods, and whoever else you can think of, the smallest growers need to make the biggest bucks per piece of item because they don't have much production space. The larger growers can afford to put in 10 acres of this and have a certain amount of loss, or get low prices because they have so much of it. And so this is where things are going to either work or not work with efforts like the Food Conservancy or New South. And that's what happened with New South, is that they started coming up against those barriers, and then the price of the grower has to drop in order for the product to move. So how far are the growers willing to let the price drop before it's not worth it for them anymore? These same peppers that we sell to ONF for $3.25 for green and $3.75 a pound for colored makes it worthwhile to grow peppers in an expensive hoop house. If you drop the price to $2, I'm not going to sell it to them. I'll just go directly to the public and get what I can get, you know. So,
And that public market's not saturated yet.
we brought home peppers yesterday.
So there are times.
Well,
And what will you do with those? Would that be a loss, or?
we'll offer them again to Ozark. We'll probably pack up some of them for Farmer's Table on Monday for Tuesday delivery. Green peppers keep a really long time. We can recycle them into our CSA program on Wednesday.
Yeah.
So we haven't been throwing anything away.
Cool.
It's just that's because we have all these different markets, you know.
And the Food Conservancy wouldn't take your older thumbs.
They would, but I'd be super reluctant to take it over there and sell it at that price. You know, I'm going to do everything possible not to sell at that kind of a price. I don't actually know what they're
But
paying.
it's going to be a wholesale price versus, you know.
Right. And so, like, the people that are, like, for instance, Pat Jones, who's running Blue Mountain Farm, he worked here for 3 years, and he's got a new farm down there, and the Fort Smith market, as far as I know, didn't open this year. He doesn't have a CSA. They started an on-farm stand, and he was selling into the Food Conservancy, but of course he was selling the highest value type items to them, like salad mix and stuff. Well, this is a layout for 2 new 14 by 100 foot caterpillar tunnels. And caterpillar tunnels are different from these large hoop houses up here. These large hoop houses at the top are 30 feet wide and 96 feet long, and are permanent installations. These can be temporary and can be moved around more easily. They're called caterpillars because of this roping over the top of the plastic that secures the plastic that makes them look segmented like a caterpillar, right? The main difference between this type of tunnel and the other tunnel is that, like I said, these are movable if you want to move them. We may not move them. We may just build enough of them we can take the plastic off and let rainfall penetrate the soil. We didn't want to build any more of the permanent construction. What we needed to figure out is how we could deal with the soil issues that happen over time with the permanent greenhouse. because they're warm all winter long and the soil doesn't get as cold and the soil doesn't freeze, and because they don't get appreciable overhead irrigation, they can build up things like salts or things like root knot nematodes that don't happen in our soil outside so much here, not in this climate anyway. And so what we found is there's some crops that we grow, like these flowers that are blooming in that first caterpillar over there, Lysianthus, is very sensitive to fusarium wilt. And that flower is why we got into hoop houses in general. It was something that was really valuable that needed protection for planting in really early spring to have a long, slow vegetative growth in a cool climate that we didn't have outside. It was either too cold or too hot. So because of that flower, we started building hoop houses, the smaller ones that are down in the other corner. So what we wanted to do was we wanted to move out to some houses that didn't have those soil diseases and that had the option of either moving them around easily or just taking the plastic off. The caterpillars cost $1,800 a piece. They're 14 by 100. You can only get 3 beds in them. The main hoop houses are 30 by 96. You can get 6 beds in that are all almost 4 feet wide. The wall beds are a little bit narrower. And we were just talking about anchoring them. So in the big tunnels, in ours, every other ground post is in concrete. And the end wall pieces are all in concrete. We have so many different crops that we're growing, flowers, herbs, and vegetables, that already we have really a steady stream of different kinds of plants going through the houses. It's not like we're just planting tomatoes every year in the same house. When you do that, you have to end up building up tomato diseases that you end up having to go to grafted tomatoes. A lot of people grow tomatoes in the same house all the time, especially people up north that have heated houses. But because we're growing a succession of, like, these peppers will probably be followed with lettuces, it will be followed by early spring flowers, and then be followed by some kind of midsummer vegetable, and all through different kinds of plant families. We tend to not build up the same kind of diseases all the time. The type of things that show up most commonly in high tunnels for people who are growing out of season greens, for instance, salad mixes, high value salad mixes, is sclerotinia. And even though we see sclerotinia in the houses, because we're rotating a lot of things through them, we don't tend to have like huge problems of it. We have enough rotations happening. This is an example of how we normally will start inside the house. Even prior to construction. We may not bed up like this prior to construction, but we'll definitely till the soil real thoroughly before construction. So when you're building a large high tunnel like that, it's nice to have your soil really well worked, especially if you're not going to put a tractor in it again after you put your end walls on. Now, some people, build their tunnels so they can get their tractor in and out. All of ours have smaller doors because we're going to work the insides of the tunnels with a walk-behind tractor that we can move around in there. We're not going to go back in there. After the end wall is constructed, we're not going ever back in there with a tractor again. So this is the last chance we have to do any tractor work, is before they're constructed. We have a spader on our tractor, which basically does the same kind of work as it's a little bit deeper than a tractor rototiller. But I spaded it twice. Actually, I spaded it once, and I tilled it with a tractor rototiller twice in order to get the soil really well worked up. And we wanted it well worked up because what we had here was a situation just like these squash beds where there was a grass path in between the beds. So somehow we needed to quickly get rid of that grass, which includes Bermuda. Okay, and so in order to plant right away, you have to do that by hand. If you have more time, you can cover the whole area with black plastic and kill it, and then go in and work the soil, but we wanted to do it within 2 weeks. So this was just all tilled up late last week, and then on Thursday we came in here by hand and went through the whole area, and the area that was in the paths, we just were combing through it with rakes and forks, garden forks and stuff, and just picking out these baskets are full of sod roots that came out. Once that was done, then we just took out the sod where it was. We started dressing with compost on the bed. So we laid out these beds inside these small tunnels. We have enough room for a 3-foot wide bed and a 4-foot wide bed and a 3-foot wide bed. Just 3 beds inside of one of those caterpillar tunnels. And that's with an 18-inch path. And that 18-inch path will get a little bit narrower over time. Even if we start with an 18-inch path, it'll tend to fill in a little bit. So basically we just put the rebar in at the corners. Another construction detail when you're first getting started is this initial layout is super important. Finding your corners. So there's a couple different ways to do it. In this case, we had structures that we wanted the new tunnels to be parallel to. So that meant that we had one line already. Actually, we had 2 lines already. We had a long side and we had the side, one end of them that we wanted these to all line up, and we wanted them to be parallel to each other. Normally, if you're just starting out on some fresh land, you have to create, you don't want a parallelogram for your greenhouse. You want a perfect rectangle that has 90-degree angles at every corner. So finding your first 4 corners and placing them correctly is first step. The other thing is that putting these on slopes. So when we first were thinking about putting these big houses up here, 100 feet long, we know we don't have any level ground here anywhere on our property. And we actually don't want to bulldoze out an area because we don't want to lose the topsoil, right? We want our topsoil intact, and we don't want to take it off somewhere and then put back on it. Now you can do that if your land is close to level. But in this case, we've got these long slope, very gentle slopes. And so when I called Morgan County about putting the 100-foot long houses or 96-foot long houses on slopes, they said, yes, the Amish up in Missouri do it all the time. And they heat with wood, and they put the wood stove on the bottom end of the slope, and all the heat rises through the greenhouse. I thought, well, that sounds super smart. The only limitation to that is that works on a gentle slope like this. If you don't have a gentle slope and it's more of a severe slope, let's say, I'm not quite sure, this is probably only like 10% or so. On a gentle slope that works. The limiting factor is that your sidewall that's going to open up and down for ventilation, it is going to turn out to be a slight parallelogram because it's going to look sort of like this. It's not going to be this nice straight level to the ground thing. It's going to be like this, right? And the limitation is that once you put your, if I were laying this out as one of those long houses, I'd put my first, the ground stakes are the pieces that you drive into the ground that the bows go onto. So on a big house like this, you've got ground stakes that get lined up on both sides of the house at the bow spacing. Generally, it's going to be 4 to 6 feet that you drive into the ground. And then those all, if you're on a level, you can pull a string from the 2 end pieces on one side, and with a string level, and you can drive your posts in part way just to get them to stand up straight, and then you pull your string level very, very tight, and wherever that string level hits is where you want your swedge line. So the swedge is where the pipe is slightly reduced so the other piece can fit over it. So basically you've got a string pulled very, very tight, and you start driving in your post so that the swedge line lines up right with your string, right? And then they're all even. But in a situation like this, where we're on a slope, you can't use a level, but you want the same distance out of the ground, right? You want the house to be not like this. You want it to be one smooth. So you want this one to be 5 feet out of the ground, this one to be 5 feet out of the ground. You don't know what these are going to be, but you're going to pull a string and then pound each stake in, each ground post in, until the swedge line is right at that string, and you get this nice sloping line that's gradual. And that's how these were all done. And it's worked out fine. It hasn't been any problem to have them on a slight slope. We like raised beds. Not everybody wants to put raised beds in their hoop house, but at some point you have to. The most intensive use of space is dividing the growing area into sections where you can plant more heavily and having a walking path rather than trying to have, like you might have outside with a single line and a cultivated line. So what we're doing here is that we've roped off the beds. There's a 3-foot bed and an 18-inch path and a 4-foot wide bed and an 18-inch path. This is just one small house here at Caterpillar Tunnel. And then we actually shoveled it with shovels. You just throw the path soil into the bed. That's a very easy, I shouldn't say easy, that's a simple way to do it. There are other ways to do it. We do have a rotary plow on our BCS that will throw soil in one direction, it'll throw it onto the bed, and we could do that if we didn't have any help. But it's not that easy to control, to really control the line. So we want to start out. We won't do this again. We won't ever do this again. This shoveling action inside the hoop house. We'll do it in a modified form, but we won't be shoveling the paths out ever again. So it's nice. It doesn't really take that long. There were probably 5 of us out here. It took maybe an hour and a half. It was all shoveled up. Once it's all been shoveled up, you see we have a bunch of rocks to deal with. We need to level out the soil. So we basically, on these beds over here that have compost on them, we leveled the beds off with rakes just to get a rough level. And then we're dressing them with compost. This is Fayetteville City compost, about 2 or 3 inches worth. And then we're going to put feather meal, a dressing of feather meal on each bed, probably about 2 gallons per bed. And then we're going to actually come in with garden forks, and we're going to sift through the top few inches of soil in order to take the large rocks out. And that's also going to sift in the compost. That's why I haven't taken the tiller back on this to put the compost down yet, because we're going to actually sift it with garden forks. Now, our entire lower garden was done that way because we have so many rocks here in Carroll County. We have a ton of rocks, and it's nice to get the larger ones. Let's say everything bigger than a half of your fist out, if at all possible. We used to cart those off down to a little rock wall that runs the entire length of the garden. Now it's covered up by bamboo. Now we have these bags that North Carolina strawberry growers use for weighting down rock covers. So this is a mesh, plastic mesh that comes in long rolls, and it opens up to a tube, and we can just tie a knot in one end, and we just fill it up with rocks, and then we tie it shut, and we use those rocks bags everywhere for weighting down landscape fabric and row covers during the winter time. So it's just handy having those rock bags. We capture these rocks and use them somewhere else. Yeah. Once that's been sifted, I probably won't have to take the tiller back on it, but we do have a walk behind tiller that I can use to till these beds. We have what's called a depth control system that lets you till the bed without going in too deep, because I actually want to keep the compost in the top 2 or 3 inches of the soil without burying it. So if I do any tilling out here, it will be with that depth control on it, so we only till in the first little bit. But because it's already been tilled and it has not rained, and if we get the covers on before it rains and everything's already tilled, we don't really need to till it again. We're just going to sift the soil so that the rocks come out, and at the same time the fertilizer and the compost get incorporated. And then we're going to put landscape fabric over the beds with holes burned in them for our kale crop. All these beds are going to be kale, just kale, for winter sales into Fayetteville. And we used lots of landscape fabric, 4-foot wide landscape fabric that's pinned down with landscape staples. And it has holes burned in a pattern, and these beds, they'll be 12 inches apart, 3 rows in the outside bed, 4 rows in the middle bed, and the plants get planted through those, and we can eliminate all of the weeding associated with that crop for the whole term that it's in there, because it's going to be in there until next middle of March. You don't have to manage it that way. You'll see houses up here. The pepper crop up here was not planted on landscape fabric this year, which you can plant on black plastic mulch film. You can plant through straw. You can plant. What we did in this case is we planted the ginger on bare ground, and it's not mulched because it has to be hilled up during the season. And we planted the peppers on bare ground and let them get about 1.5 feet tall. And we came back in with mulch from the city of Fayetteville, and we mulched around them with the mulch, and that mulch is actually going to be, it's finally enough decomposed that we can actually till it in on the next round of cropping. So you can see, and that's worked super well. That stuff's awesome. We sell both green peppers and colored peppers, but if you want to sell colored peppers and you want them to come on earlier, having warmer nighttime temperatures and warmer temperatures in general, because we put these out in early May, and it's still pretty cold at night, depending on the year, of course. But we can put these out in early May, and then they're going to run all the way through, even if we start getting frosts in mid-October, they'll probably last until late October. So we have them protected from frost.
Yeah.
That's another thing.
Right. You're gonna get a
And
longer season.
as I was telling Larry, we don't put hot peppers inside because they rarely have issues with burning. And you can, when you see these peppers inside, these are planted on a super intensive spacing. They're 1 foot apart. We just used 1 foot this year. Normally we use 2. I may back up to 18 inches. The problem with color peppers is that the stage from when they're edible as green peppers to the time that they're fully colored, they get much more valuable in terms of sales. And people, the demand is higher for colored peppers, but there's so many things that happen to them on the way to being colored. There are insects, there are rats, there's anthracnose, there's sunburn, there's all kind of stuff. So we actually do both. We harvest some for green and some for colored peppers, even though the colored peppers give you a lot better price. So we're growing Carmen for red peppers, Escamillo for yellow peppers, and then these green, what we're harvesting for green peppers, we really like Big Bertha. That's a huge pepper from Park Seed Company. Huge green pepper. All of the green peppers color to red, the ones that we're growing. Red Knight, Olympus, King Arthur, Big Bertha. I think that about covers it. So this is a 30 by 96 hoop house in its permanent location. It has, these are called bows. This is a Gothic style with a slightly peaked roof. This helps snow slide off. Once it snows and the temperature in here is warmer, especially on a sunny day, even if it's really cold outside, and it's going to help to melt the snow where it's touching the plastic, and the snow will slide off more easily if it's steeper. These are nicely designed houses because these peaks don't have any rough edges on them and they're not too sharp. If you start to get into kits that have peaks that are too acute, the plastic rubs in those places and wears through very fast. So this is a nice compromise where it does have a Gothic peak to it, but it's not too acute, this angle. In this house, this is from Morgan County Seeds in Missouri. I believe that this house kit that included the hip boards. So these boards on the sides here are called hip boards, the ones that are at your chest level. And the boards that are at the ground level are called the base boards. And then this all construction on the end is called the end wall construction. And in this particular house, this is the last house that we did in 2017. This is an NRCS cost share. I believe they paid about $10,000 on this house. And I think the kit was around $7,600, and then of course we did all the construction. So gradually NRCS has added in money to the cost share program that allows for people to have people come in and do some construction for them, because a lot of people don't know how to construct the houses. We've been able to do it, but it did require the use of our tractor and bucket to get high enough, so there are some hurdles there for people that don't have equipment. What I like about this metal end wall construction, it's tubular steel that comes as 2x4s. It's basically like using lumber, except that you're cutting metal, and then everything is held together with L brackets. And I really like this. The baseboard on the end walls is also metal, which means you'll never have to replace any wood along the ground or verticals on the end walls. Whereas on the side walls, we're certified organic, so we cannot have any treated lumber in touch with the soil, in contact with the soil. So if we're going to use lumber along the ground on our hoop houses, it has to be either Western cedar or plastic lumber or something like that. We've used red cedar on some of our other constructions. Now the hip board is not in contact with the ground and it is treated. That's a 2x6, that's a 2x8 on the hip board, and it's a 2x6 at the ground level. You can see that once the bows were up The hip boards are attached with brackets. A couple of nice things about this is that, so you can see that this plastic is attached to it, a channel on the outside, and this just butts up against it. This is a small tube that fits in the sleeve at the top of this. And then this is attached with ropes to little pulleys. So there's actually a weight, there's a cable that's running along the outside here with a weight on the other end that keeps it taut. And there's little pulleys along the outside. And so this is functioning with all the little pulleys on the cable. And now I'm going to lock it in place so it can't go anywhere. The nice thing about these is in the wintertime, you don't always want to drop the sidewalls all the way down. You wanted some ventilation. Maybe it's 20 degrees outside and it's 80 in here when it's sunny, and you want maybe to keep it at 72. Depends on what you're growing. You can just do this. And you don't have cold wind coming at your plants right at ground level. That's important, especially if you have all your plants covered up with row covers for secondary cover inside. The wind might come in here, but it's not going to pick up the row cover and blow it off of the plants.
Yeah, and that keeps the rabbits and stuff out too.
That's the other thing, is that all summer long, because right now, because it's warm enough still at night, that we could keep these sidewalls open, but we don't want the groundhogs and the rabbits or anybody else coming in here, so we'll just lower this. So even these days, we're coming out here in the evening before it gets dark. And we'll leave it right about here. And then close the doors, and we're protected against critters coming in at night. That doesn't exclude insects. There are other people that will put insect exclusion netting between the baseboard and the hip board, especially if they're growing things like cucumbers or things subject to cucumber beetles. They'll have an insect-free house, and they'll grow parthenocarpic, self-fertile varieties of cucumbers, things like that. The door is important because it's a 4-foot wide metal polycork carbonate covered door, which is wide enough to easily get in with a walk-behind tiller. Of course, it's not big enough for a tractor, but you're not going to bump the sides of the tiller. In the first two houses, we use metal doors from Lowe's with wooden frames, and the wooden frames are already starting to rot, and the doors that are 36 inches wide are barely big enough to get the tiller in. So you have to be super careful not to knock the door frame. This is much better, and we'll probably replace all of our doors with these. What I'm doing here is adjusting these drip tapes, which are on, that are watering newly planted rows of quick succession cool season crops that have to be out of here by early December, when this house will be completely planted in a very high value cut flower crop that has to go in early November. This right here is what we are using for header pipe. So this 1 1/4 inch, what's called oval hose, connects directly to our 2-inch underground lines that are part of our main water system. And they call it oval pipe because outside you can drive over it and it'll flatten, and it only fills up and becomes round when it's full of water. But I like the 1 1/4 inch pipe. You can see we've installed some faucets up here in case we need to water anything in. Every house needs at least 2 of those to pull hoses to water in newly planted transplants, that type of thing. So we don't have any overhead watering up here. It's all drip tape. And there are ways to install overhead lines, like we could run a line up here and along that purlin with drop down sprinklers that would cover 3 beds at a time. We just haven't done that because we found that things germinate very well if we don't mind coming and fiddling with our drip tape. I could easily put 4 tapes on here. This stuff is all just coming up. It's about 3 days that's been planted. Normally The reason there's only 3 tapes here in 4 rows is that once this is germinated and it's up a little bit, these tapes are going to be moved in between here, and the plants will be big enough to access the water that's coming from the tubes in between the lines. But for right now, I'm just putting the hoses back and forth to keep them moist enough to germinate until they're big enough, and then the hoses will be in between double lines. And we do this all over the garden in terms of like carrot germination or things that need to be kept constantly moist until they come up, because we already have drip tape everywhere and we're not really easily set up for overhead watering large areas. This is a technique that works very well as long as you're willing to maintain it. You know, as long as you're willing to just go out and either put enough drip tape on the bed to go down every furrow or move it around a little bit.
Okay. Well, thanks again, Mark. I hope that was informative for everyone.
That was a lot of information.
Had a little bit of a technical issue there. Was trying to share my screen for the video, and it locked me up where I couldn't do anything without interrupting the video. So I do have some wonderful pieces of information in some links. I'm going to go ahead and share those real quick. As many of y'all know, I'm a amateur botanist, I would say, and an ecologist and native plant expert for the Beaver Watershed Alliance. And I do have some publications I really like. One I would recommend is, many of y'all probably already know this, but it is Bringing Nature Home from Douglas Tallamy. Has lots of great information for trees and shrubs that benefit wildlife, the role of native plants in agriculture and ornamentals. One of my favorites, many people haven't heard of before, is this one right here. This is the Essential Trees and Shrubs of the Eastern United States by Tony Dove and Ginger Woolbridge, and I'll share links for these in the chat as well as references. Here in the Ozarks, Ozark Wildflowers from Doug Kurz. This one has a color-coded index of plants, as you can see here up in the top. So if you see a flower of a color and you're just not really sure what it might be, you can try to identify it using those colors. Many people around here, myself included, like the trees of Arkansas. This is a great field guide if you're just becoming familiar with the trees of Arkansas. Has some great pictures in it. You can pick up one of these for $5 at the Arkansas Forestry Commission offices. Has a lot of great information and wonderful pictures in it, and a good diagnostic tool for taking out in the field with you. A growing interest here in the United States is native plant agriculture, and there is an organization or a company out of Ohio called Indigenous Landscapes. Become friends with one of the owners there, Solomon Gamboa. This is a book they have produced. This is, I believe they're doing a 4-part volume. This is the first book they have. This has it's primarily focused towards Ohio plants and the eastern Midwest, I'd say. But there are some overlapping species we've seen here, but there's a lot of good general information that's good for growing agricultural products of indigenous plants. You wouldn't always think of or wouldn't immediately think of as being edible or commercial or growable in an agricultural setting, like wood nettle can be used as a spinach alternative. One plant that we're really promoting through this program is a native plant propagation guide and nursery model, also through Indigenous Landscapes. And this is basically just a guide showing how to raise plants in a nursery setting, things you would have to consider, such as container size, and layout and things like that. I'm going to go ahead and share several of these resources over here in the chat box. There's some online resources. There's some PDFs you can download. There's also some Facebook groups. If you're into Facebook, that's a kind of a contentious subject these days. And I'd be happy to email these to anyone who is interested as well. All right. Well, let's see. Do we have any questions? Again, the name of Mark's company is Dripping Springs Garden. It's out of near Huntsville, Arkansas. Mrs. Reynolds was asking, in a large windstorm or ice storm, how is the hoop house protected? Mark answered, for those events, which are fairly rare, they have it's basically a broom with a plate on the end of it, and it's called a snow broom, SNOBRUM. They sometimes have to go out when there's snow settling on the roof and press it up against the roof and scrape off the snow. All right. Well, again, this is a pilot program with the Natural Resources Conservation Service for their high tunnel program. It does not fall under the same requirements and restrictions as that program. This is a pilot program meant to introduce a scenario within that high tunnel program for the production of native plant materials. And we do have a number of applicants in the Beaver Lake watershed, and we are encouraging more people to apply. We will be having a new application window opening up in the spring for next year, and we're hoping to get some high tunnels installed this winter. We do have some new Q&A questions. I will be happy to send the resource and book info to those folks who are requesting it. Mark, are you on audio? I believe we may have lost Mark. He had a pretty poor connection. The Alliance will be happy to assist in marketing for products and for people who are participating in this program. Unfortunately, Pea Ridge is just outside of our watershed. Anywhere to the southeast would be. For heating high tunnel, there is a series, and I linked it in the chat, that is put out by the Iowa Extension, and I believe it's a multi-video series. I think it's about a dozen videos covering several aspects of constructing, operating, and managing and maintaining a high tunnel, and heating, irrigation, things like that were all featured in that. And I would reference that. I wouldn't speak to that myself, but I believe we've just about covered everything. Once again, my contact information is Nate at beaverwatershedalliance.org. And Neckel, if you look in the chat box on the right, there are several links. It's Iowa State University High Tunnel Series, and you'll find that link over there. We will also post these links and these resources in our Facebook group, and be happy to email these to all the registrants as well. All right, and I believe that wraps up our last high tunnel video. So thank you all very much for coming. Thanks very much to Mark Cain with Dripping Springs Garden. Thank you very much to Carrie for helping me put this all together, and and with Scott, our videographer, who shot that video. And just email me if you have any questions or comments. And once again, I thank you very much for participating. I hope you have a wonderful week. Thanks.